The mist of a November dawn doesn't shroud the smell of mud, dried sweat, or the latrine. Yet there's something different in the air. Silence. The guns have stopped. So's the shouting. What next? Welcome to Audiopi's GCSE series on Germany between 1919 and 1945. During this series, we'll be covering everything you need to study for your GCSE and help you be successful in your exams. We'll cover the establishment of the Weimar Republic, the problems it faced, and its recovery from those problems. Finally, we'll be examining the Third Reich. In this opening tutorial, we'll look at where Germany was at the end of 1918, the end of the Kaiser's German Empire, and the final events which brought it down.
That was the German equivalent of the last post, the bugle call at the end of the day originally used to signify that it was time to rest. It is now used to commemorate those who have fallen in battle. It's an appropriate piece to start this podcast as we look at the closing stages of the First World War. At the start of 1918, the war in the East had ended. The Bolshevik Revolution of October 1917 led Russia's new leader, Vladimir Lenin, to seek peace with Germany. By ending the war on two fronts in Europe, vast numbers of German troops moved to reinforce their comrades on the Western Front.
German forces had tried to make a breakthrough in the West in the spring of 1918 in the Ludendorff offensive, and had initially had some success. With American forces arriving in Europe and economic exhaustion at home, however, the Germans were driven back to a line of defences known as the Hindenburg Line. By late September, it was clear that even these defences were vulnerable, and the German government, sensing defeat, tried to negotiate.
They approached the Americans, believing that they would offer better terms than the French or the British. Given that German forces still occupied parts of France and Belgium, and that no Allied soldier had set foot on German soil, the talk was of a negotiated settlement rather than a German surrender. This was to become important in the coming months.
The national anthem of the German Empire, which we've just heard, was never very popular across the whole country. Germany, as one nation, had only been created in 1871, and it adopted the anthem of the Kaiser's own state, Prussia. Former independent kingdoms that became part of the German state, such as Bavaria, never warmed to the tune nor the words, not least because they gave the impression that the new German Empire was dominated by Prussia, something that was, arguably, the case.
Despite being one nation, in 1918 Germany comprised a number of different states, each with its own view of the direction that the country should take. That diversity was equally evident in the way that Germans saw the war. For veterans at the front, the war was going badly, but they were undefeated, and there was a strong sense that the lives of those who had fallen should not be in vain.
For civilians at home, there was a strong desire to end the suffering caused by the Allied blockade of German ports that was strangling the nation. Daily calorific intake, normally 2,500 for an adult male, was less than 1,000 calories. The demands of sending men and resources to the front had taken its toll on the German economy and placed an almost intolerable burden on German society. Domestic collapse, as much as the military position on the Western Front, played an important role in the German government seeking terms with the Allies.
Perhaps the clearest example of the resentment at the continuation of the war was the mutiny at the key German naval base of Kiel. In late October 1918, when it was becoming clear that pursuing the war was increasingly futile, the sailors at that base refused an order to face the British Royal Navy at sea. They had worked out that some form of peace settlement was imminent, and couldn't see the point in risking their lives for a war that was nearly at an end. The government dealt with the mutiny harshly, arresting 1,000 sailors and sending in the army to put down any further attempts to refuse to obey orders. However, the soldiers joined the mutineers. if a government cannot command its own armed forces, it has lost its power.
Is that right? Had the Kaiser really lost his authority, or was this just an isolated episode?
Well, the Kaiser had been under pressure for some time. In early October, he'd handed over many of his powers to the Reichstag, the German parliament, but it did little to save him. He was widely seen as responsible for the war, and little by little, not only his authority but that of his government was being ignored. You could say that there was a revolution going on under his nose.
Although we refer to the German Revolution of 1918, it might be better to describe this event as several revolutions happening at the same time. They all contributed to the Kaiser abdicating and spending the rest of his life in Holland. But the motivations for the unrest were very varied. In the autumn of 1918, Soviets, the Russian term for a workers' council, were set up to run different German towns. Soldiers and sailors also formed their own Soviets where they were based. Given that Russia had experienced 2 revolutions in 1917, it seemed as if Germany was heading the same way, towards a revolutionary socialist republic.
I'm not so sure. Many of those who refused to acknowledge the Kaiser's authority did so simply to end the war, not because they were socialists. There was no consensus of view as to what the future of Germany would be from these different revolutionary groups, except that the future for Germany would not involve the Kaiser.
He simply had to go. Kaiser Wilhelm II was persuaded by the German Army High Command that he could no longer count on the support of the armed forces, and as a result, he abdicated on the 9th of November 1918. As we've seen, in the end, the combination of blame for the war, a desperate economic situation, mutiny in the armed forces, and wider popular unrest had brought him down. This left a vacuum of power. The constitution provided for Germany to be a form of constitutional monarchy, and in the absence of a monarch, the whole constitution would have to be rewritten. Until a new government was lawfully elected, any interim government would have to base its authority on the goodwill of the German people, a particularly precarious position.
Indeed. That's the background to the creation of what was to become the Weimar Republic, the government that came to control Germany after the First World War. It was a toxic legacy. War-weary soldiers wanted an end to the conflict, but on fair terms. A domestic population that were left starving by the war and desperate for peace. Revolutionary socialists trying to bring about a revolution, and a nation in uncharted territory for what should happen next.
What a mess. In our second podcast, we'll see how the Weimar Republic staggered out of the ashes of the German Empire.